All right, everybody. Looks like we are live. I apologize for being late. We had just had some technical difficulties here, but I think I figured it out. So bear with me. This is a live stream, so we do occasionally experience, connectivity issues. So if the signal does drop, just hang in for a little bit. I'm going to try my best to keep that going. So today we're working on this drawing of these oranges. I'm Scott. This is Artist Network Drawing Together. We meet every Wednesday to draw live together. I see a lot of familiar faces here. Thank you all for joining. The reference image can be found in the description below. So just copy and paste that URL into your browser, and you can see the full-size reference image, and you can follow along with me. Feel free throughout this event to type any questions you have. If you type them in all caps, I'm more likely to see it, and I will do my best to answer any questions I have. And I also really encourage you all to point out observations. I like to hear from you if something seems off, if the proportions, the values, etc., something seems wrong. Just let me know. Let's see, I just want to go quickly through here to see there's a lot of comments. I just want to see if there's any questions that I'm missing. I don't see a whole lot today. So I'm going to keep looking through this real quickly. Okay, Thomas, so you're saying that you can hopefully be more successful than with the skull. That was bone-chillingly difficult. Nice. Yeah, that was a tricky one, but I saw some really good drawings that you posted on the website. You all have shared some of your drawings. So also you'll find in the link in the description below, there's a link to the page for this episode on Artist Network where you can share your work. I love seeing what you all are working on, and that's a great place to share that there. So, all right, let's just get to it. I'm not seeing any other questions. We're working on this gray toned paper. This is the Strathmore paper. Let me show you what I'm working on. It's this stuff right here. I find it works really well for charcoal, for graphite. It doesn't have much of a tooth, so for charcoal it can sometimes kind of slip around on the page, but I think it holds well enough. We're going to be working with charcoal pencils, the same materials as we used last week with the skull. So I've got my HB and I've got my 6B charcoal pencils. I've got my 2 erasers, my plastic and my rubber eraser. If you have my kneaded eraser. If you have a rubber eraser, that'll work just as well. And then I have my white pastel pencil here to bring in some of the highlights. So let's dig right into it. Now, I believe I did an orange very early on in this series. So this kind of continues with that, but I've made it a little bit more complex. What I really liked about this reference was the way the peel kind of contrasted the form of the orange. I'm sorry, I'm just looking here. I just want to make sure that the stream is doing well. It looked like it was jumping around a little bit. So let me adjust the settings to see if we can reduce any of those issues. Okay, I'm going to apply I'm changing the settings just a little bit. It may reduce the quality just a bit, but I think it might reduce any sort of buffering issues. So if you do notice anything like that, feel free to call that out and I'll do my best to address it. So let's dig right into it. The real challenge here is capturing the texture. And then one of the things that also occurred to me when I did the preparatory sketch is there's a big challenge in interpreting the value of this color. With the relatively desaturated background against that bright orange, there's a lot of visibility that's caused by just the color saturation. The fact that the orange is so intense creates that contrast that allows us to see it clearly. But there are instances in this reference where the value contrast is actually pretty low. And so translating that is going to be really an interesting challenge. But I might have to do some kind of creative kind of interpretation in order to really pull this together. All right, thank you, Rachel. It seems like it, hopefully that works. The internet, it says it's got an excellent connection here, but I noticed it was really skipping around. So let's dig right into it. The first thing I want to do, and this is really the kind of the process that we talk about a lot. Let's first grab the right pencil. I'm going to use the HB. I just want to get some information on the page. Now this HB pencil is a little bit harder than the 6B, so it's making a lighter mark. And you can see I'm using the side of the pencil here on purpose because I want these marks to float on the surface of the page more. This encourages me to stay loose. It encourages me to use the side of the pencil and create broader strokes. And it allows the marks to float on the surface of the paper more than if I were to switch to this tripod grip, which is more likely to emboss the page and create a kind of a grooved line on the surface that is more difficult to remove later. In the preparatory sketch, what was really challenging was maintaining these proportions. I want to kind of pay closer attention to that in this go around. And in particular, really comparing the size of the orange, the fruity part versus the peel. That's where my brain really kind of struggled with that. So I'm hoping that in the end I'll be able to get to that more quickly. What tended to happen is I was so focused on the fruit part that my mind kind of expanded that. I saw it larger than it actually was. So I kept having to shrink it in order to make it work. Again, one of those things that I will kind of address as we go along. But this initial stage is all about getting information about what needs to change. And I'm thinking both in terms of line and shape in this. We've talked about that a lot in the series. You know, when we think about line, we're using lines to represent the edge of the object. When we think about shape, we're looking at these broad forms, these broad shapes of light and dark. And the way we approach the drawing, you know, the way we initiate the drawing can sometimes have an impact on how it all comes together. And so I'm kind of thinking in terms of both. I'm looking at the shape of the shadow, but also thinking more linearly about the overall form. So very quickly, I've got an initial kind of pass established, and I can see off the bat that I'm not really happy with this space over here. I want to shift everything over. And these initial gestural marks are really helpful in making those types of decisions because I got to that point very quickly, and I can see very quickly some of these major issues like just basic composition. Is it going to fit on the page the way I want it to? And I could see that right off the bat that no, it wasn't, so I can move that. And I haven't invested a whole lot of time at this point, so I'm not worried about changing that. One of the things we've talked about in this whole series is that there's a correlation between the marks you make and the state of your mind, right? Marks are thoughts. Every mark that we're making here originates as a thought in the brain, and it gets translated down the arm onto the surface. And one of the things I can tell right now is my brain's all scattered. And so I'm really kind of curious to see what happens on the page here. You know, just coming out of other meetings, other things happening throughout the day, and what I'm hoping out of this drawing experience is that I bring myself into focus a little bit more, and so the drawing can reflect the inner state of the mind, but it also works the other way around. You know, sometimes drawing can really affect the way the brain works. So. Mary Jo is saying, I've only got tan tone paper. Are there adjustments I should make? I wouldn't worry about that for this one, actually. I actually considered using tan tone paper because there's a natural warmth to it that I think will align very well with just the orange color. So I say go for it. I don't think there's really anything that you're going to have to worry about with this one. Let's see. And then Lindy is saying, I'm dividing the paper vertically and horizontally in half. Finding your center point, I think, is a really helpful thing to do. So that's a good point. Excellent. I like that comment, Adele. All right, scattered brain. Yeah, I can tell my brain's all over the place, but it is what it is. And like I said, I think for me, drawing has always been a tool to help focus my mind. And even when I was a young, kid, I would just find myself going to drawing, and it would kind of bring me into the present moment. And I didn't have a way to really articulate that. I don't know if you could hear that, but I could feel it scratching on the surface there. Sometimes that happens with your charcoal. You'll hit like a rough spot that will end up just scratching the paper, and just kind of rotate your pencil. And that's one of the reasons why I like to tell people to, as you're building up these broad areas of value, constantly rotate your pencil and your fingers. Let's see. Okay. So what I had done here is I just kind of switched to kind of toning that background as a way to keep the drawing moving forward, give me something to work on, but it doesn't require a whole lot of thought. And in this early stage, it allows me to kind of talk through more. All right, so going back to Lindy, you made the comment of dividing the paper horizontally and vertically to find that center. That is a really good tool to kind of help orient myself. So if I determine what basically the center point of the orange is, I can align that with the center point of the paper and then build outward from there. I can set my kind of outer parameters and determine that I want the orange to fit within a certain range on the paper, and then gradually divide that up. And that's the process that I like to use in general, is starting with big measurements and gradually working into smaller ones. Let's see. The other thing that, as we've talked about before when working with toned paper, is that I know that where I'm kind of starting with already a tone in there, that I can build the lights using the white charcoal. As I work through the process, though, as I work through the drawing, though, my mind is going to try to calibrate and recalibrate the value structure here and start to interpret this as light. So I just need to keep that in my mind, knowing that I can expand the tonal range into the and not get too locked down on any of these proportions or any of these. All right, so as I move my eyes back and forth quickly, what I'm doing now is looking for kind of basic forms. And again, this is feeling more scattered than perhaps some of my other ones, reflecting the inner state of my mind. So I'm going to try to get myself to focus a little bit more. Where I keep coming back to is the center of the orange. It's all in shadow. And what I'm trying to do right now into drawing the forms, but instead drawing the shadow shapes. Now, many of you have heard that term before, but if you're new, what a shadow shape is the combination of the cast shadow and the form shadow. So the form shadow is the shadow, it's the object that is. All right, are we back? I think we're back. Sorry about that. Internet issues. They happen. I'm sure all of you, now working from home have experienced that, but I think we're going to be better now. All right, I'm just going to keep working. All right, yeah, it looks like we're back. Okay, hopefully that worked. I just switched networks, the Wi-Fi networks, and I think that'll hopefully take care of it. All right, so back to the shadow shapes. As I look at this form, I'm trying to build the whole thing up at once, and I don't want to get bogged down by the specific forms yet. I want to build into that. Again, that's just kind of the general process that I've established here. In drawing together. My general approach to drawing, it's not particularly unique, but it is perhaps a bit more kind of painterly in a way. Like, so I work in oils as well, and I kind of think very similarly as I do when I draw, kind of moving around the whole image more and trying to build the whole thing up rather than getting bogged down in particular details too early. Okay, so looking at this, now that I have the rough form established, I can kind of see where this edge of the main kind of fruit of the orange is and this edge here. That gives me a proportion that I can compare to then the distance from this edge to the edge of the peel, and want to compare that to the reference image. And so this is called comparative measuring. And if you're not familiar with that term, what that means is you're just taking a basic unit of measurement from the reference image itself. You're determining, in this case, I'm determining what this width is, and I'm comparing that to other dimensions in the reference photo. So in order to do that, I close one eye, giving me monocular vision. It flattens my depth perception. I align this edge of the pencil, this edge here, with this edge on the orange, that edge right there, and I'm sliding my thumb down the pencil to then mark the right side of the orange there. And that gives me a particular distance, and then I can compare that to the distance from here to the edge of the orange peel. And what I see when I look at the reference photo and do that is that if I take this measurement across here and carry it across, this point here should be a little bit more than 2/3 of the way, closer to 3/4 of the way to the end here. It's not quite as wide as this distance here. So I feel like I'm pretty darn close. I'm in the ballpark. Now, one of the things that we want to remember, though, is that we continually adjust as we go. Never take those proportions as truth, and always be willing to adjust them. And I found for myself, when I lock down proportions too early, I tend to get myself into trouble. It's never as correct as I'd like it to be. All right, so it looks like we're back. I don't know if we're going to have any additional issues, but thank you for sticking around while we adjusted the internet bandwidth issues here. Now, the other tool I'm using is angle sighting. So if I'm looking at the angle here, for example, I can close one eye, use my pencil to find the angle of this against looking at the reference image, and compare that to the drawing. And I can keep moving through. I can keep cycling around the drawing, looking for those. So now, as I come down here to the bottom edge of the peel, there's a turn, and that creates a point that I want to check in with relative to other aspects of the drawing. So now that I have this point, if I were to draw a plumb line, if I were to come directly up from that, I can see where it would intersect this top portion of the peel, and I can compare that to the reference photo. So I can take my pencil, line it up vertically against the reference image, and I can find that specific intersection point. And then I have this turn here that I can then also create a plumb line. I can drop down here and see where it aligns with other points in the reference photo. And in this case, this turn here is just to the right of this intersection point down here, where we have the peel kind of folding in over itself in this way. So if I draw a vertical line here, this point here is just to the right of this one. And I'm going to keep moving around the drawing. And intersection points are really helpful and critical in determining your proportions. They're very clear points that you can continue to reference and hold in your mind. So I'm going to, in that way, kind of keep moving across. I'm still using the side of my pencil. Oh, you know what I didn't grab? My trusty shading stump. That's not a good one. This guy right here, I need to use, I always use this now, and I completely forgot that. So let me bring that out there. So as I work down now here, I'm basically kind of working my way across, but as I go across, I'm constantly doing a vertical check-in from one point to the next. Since I've already established my basic parameters here, my main elements that give me a vertical set of parameters, I'm sorry, a horizontal one, and then I can check these vertical alignments here. Okay, so what I'm doing is, and I forgot to mention here because it's something that for many of you who have been with me before kind of know what my setup is, but if you're new, I have the reference image set up here on my left, and in front of me is the projection of this camera, so what you're seeing. So that is a better perspective for me to evaluate the proportions of my drawing because I don't have any sort of perspective distortion like I do here. I'm looking down at this at an angle and my brain is kind of calibrating. It's adjusting for that perspective and I'm not seeing the angles quite accurately. Having it vertically aligned is much more effective. So for you, if you need to set your drawing up at a distance, step back from it and see it as vertically, and so you're parallel with it, and then you can really evaluate your proportions and your angles that way. And so when I'm looking here, what I'm doing here is if I find an angle in the reference photo and I carry it across like this, I'm locking my wrist to find that angle, I'm comparing it to the drawing, and then making adjustments from that based on what I'm seeing in the screen captured on this camera rather than what I'm looking at down here. Because I've had so many drawings really fall apart because it looks correct from this perspective, but when I stand it up vertically, I see all sorts of perspective and proportion issues. So kind of keep that in mind as you're going, that you want to be constantly evaluating things. The other thing that can be really helpful is you got to get kind of comfortable drawing, drawing kind of offset is kind of the best way I can describe it. If I'm looking at the reference image, I'm trying to be aware of what is happening in my peripheral vision. And so if I'm observing an angle or a curve, I can be tracking the motion of my hand relative to the observations I'm making, and that can sometimes be really helpful as well. So splitting your awareness can be a really helpful tool, and being able to draw from your peripheral vision helps to kind of dial things in. All right, so there's this orange slice here that really stands out, and I want to establish its height, its distance. Where is it relative to the bottom and the top of this orange? So in order to do that, I need to give myself a little bit more information about the shape of the orange. So I've got this slice here forming, this one over here. I want to do a quick check and look at the height compared to this. That feels pretty good. And now I can come down here. What I need to do is evaluate the distance from the top of the orange here to the top of this point that sticks out like this, right in here, this one that's more visible right in the front. That distance here is the same as the distance from the tip to the base of that, where the orange peel is. And so I have two things that I need to work on. If I have this top portion of the orange established, I can come down here. I need to lock down the bottom, and then if I simply divide that, find the center point between them, that's where the tip of that orange slice needs to belong. So as I do that, as I place the bottom edge of this orange, I want to do a quick check-in horizontally to see where it aligns with other parts of the drawing. In this case, I have this turn here, and it's kind of inverted. This part needs to be lower than this part. So I need to evaluate whether this is incorrect or whether I need to drop this down. So what do I need to do? I feel like this needs to come up. That's just looking at it. Needs to come up quite a bit. Yeah, look at that change. This whole area here needs to go away, and luckily that's all in shadow, so I can just darken that. So that kind of goes to show you how much drawing is about establishing relationships between things. And it's so easy to get stuck in the mode of getting kind of fixated on one element and lose track of where it is relative to everything else. So if we move that turn in the orange up, that intersection is still in the right spot relative to this. The bottom of the orange is now below this. And now I have these proportions that I can use, and that's right about here is about the center, the distance between the bottom and the top of that orange. So drawing really is an act of discovery, and we've talked about that before, right? We want the drawing to emerge at the same pace that our observations of the object are developing. When I first look at this, an initial glance tells me that that's an orange, right? I don't need to think about how I understand that. Your brain just automatically processes all that subconscious information, and it sends a signal to your conscious mind that that's an orange that's been peeled. And what we're doing throughout the drawing process is really examining that signal and say, well, how do we know? Really, what is unique about this? What are the specific characteristics of this that give me all of that information? And throughout the drawing process, we're gradually connecting with that and understanding that more deeply. And so the drawing process reflects that development of our awareness of the object. Let me see. Let's see. I see a question. Do I teach oil painting? I do have a few courses on Artist Network. 2 on color, 1 on color theory, 1 on color mixing, and then I have a plein air course. Those are all oil painting. Let's see. And then FC is asking, are you looking at the monitor or the PC for the reference photo? So I had the same reference photo that you're seeing below me right now, but I have it on a larger scale on a monitor right off here to the left. That's also where the chat is. So when I'm looking at the chat, I can see both the reference and the chat there. And I like drawing from monitors versus a printout. The color is just richer, more vibrant on the monitor. So, all right. So I'm still using the side of the pencil because it really encourages the material to float on the top of the paper, and so and I don't want any hard lines that are going to impact things. Sorry for the broken conversation there. I'm going to try to complete a thought more quickly. Again, the scattered mind is playing out here. But looking at this now, you can kind of see what looks essentially like a foggy representation of that of the reference photo. And I feel like that's coming together because now what we can do is, now that I have the whole thing established, I'll feel more confident about the overall proportions when I go in and add more detail. The one thing that's really kind of standing out for me, though, is still this point. This is giving me trouble. I didn't talk about any sort of positive and negative space, but looking at the negative space, the shape created in the space around the object can be really helpful in controlling those proportions. So if I look at the reference photo, I'm feeling pretty good about this shape here. I think I can make some additional adjustments. But something really still seems off. Let's see. I think I overcorrected earlier. So what I can do now, what I need to do is adjust this line down here. I think I need to be closer to this point right here. Bring this part down a bit. And it may seem like a minor thing, and for you, you may decide if it's off, it's not worth fixing. But those are some of the decisions that you make as an artist that are going to be particular to you, and that's okay if you have a different tolerance for accuracy than I do. So for some of you, you may need to really stick with a drawing to make sure that the proportions are 100% correct. And I may have a tolerance of saying like 95% is all right by me. And some of you may say 50% correct is close enough. But that's what makes us all different. All right, so I'm just kind of using the kneaded eraser to clean up some of these lines here because I've lost the edge of this orange. But I'm feeling better about that now. I'm going to curl up here to, you see how this really creates this bowl here with the outer side of the peel coming in. And I'm not worrying about the value relationship here yet, but as long as I know where that edge is, I'm gonna continue to work on that a little bit later. All right. Yeah, Anna asking you a question. So I'm drawing this orange here. You'll see it in the image below. If you are joining late and you do want to follow along, you'll find the reference image in the description. And if you're, if you want to see all of them, if you're a subscriber to Artist Network TV, which is our subscription, I've added all 60, the first 60 episodes of Drawing Together are now loaded into that subscription. So you can check them all out there. I've kind of created them in batches of 10. And they have all the reference photos there as well. All right. This is something I like to do is I kind of refer to it as kind of building up and then taking down, smoothing things out a little bit to help unify, and then I'm going to continue to add more to it. But I like to do that because it not only smooths out the marks, but it kind of helps clear my brain a little bit. So now what I'm doing is kind of moving around the drawing and correcting things. And this is fairly an arbitrary spot for me to settle on down in here. So you may decide that you want to work somewhere else to help refine the drawing. But there's something about this area that caught my attention. So I'm doing a bit of negative drawing, focusing on the shape of this dark area and allowing that to create the shape of the light here. And I like the jagged edge, and I think some of that detail is going to be really helpful. And if I squint, I can see this as one basic shape here. And squinting also helps to really prioritize value relationships, so you can see what needs to be increased in terms of contrast or what needs to be decreased. Our eyes are very good at seeing value contrast, and we tend to overstate our observations of contrast, kind of in fear that the viewer won't see it or recognize it. But it's just something that I like to keep in my mind as I work, is that subtlety can be a good thing. And now this grip for the pencil, it's some sort of modified grip. It's kind of a combination of the overhand grip, which is this, with the tripod grip, which is this. If I swing it so that it's pivoted between my kind of wedge between these fingers, and I can use my fingertips to stabilize, I get the control of the tripod grip, but I'm still utilizing the side of the pencil. And in that way, my pencil is always sharp, so I have a sharp point when I need it. Donna is saying you take pictures on your phone as you go to check your proportions. I think that's a great tool. Um, there's lots of different ways to do, what I call as changing the context of your drawing. So you can hold your drawing up to a mirror, look at it from a distance, flip it upside down, take a picture of it with your phone. Those all change the context, so your brain resets it a little bit. You see it more objectively, because we all get locked into our observations, and it's really easy to then not see your drawing as objectively as you might need. I've certainly done that. I remember, especially in art school, or before I had really kind of worked that into my process, working for hours or days on a drawing, and it just gets so locked into it that I became less aware of the fact that major proportions were off. My brain just kind of corrected it, and I didn't see what was right in front of me, and then I bring it into class, show it with everybody, and it just hits me that I'm like, oh my God, everything is off. And I had missed it. And that feeling of dread was horrible when I was that age, because when you're in front of other classmates and your teacher, and you want to show that you know how to do this stuff, and you make a fundamental mistake that never feels good. So I try to remind myself, but I still fall into that same trap from time to time. Just get sucked into the drawing, and then we lose our objectivity, and that's when our brain again starts to accept kind of fundamental issues as truth when they need to be corrected. All right, so what do I need to do here? I think for me, I'm feeling compelled to give this a little bit more kind of detail, but I don't want to get bogged down in any one spot too long. I'm essentially kind of making observations, striking on the page, trying to make that statement on the page, but then move on. And if I reach a point where I don't really know what I need to do, and that happens a lot of times, I'll be working and I'm like, I know that something is off, but I don't see it. I don't know what mark I need to make. If I don't know, then I'll just move to something else and let my brain kind of chew on that problem while I work on something else, come back to it, and then see if later perhaps I have a better understanding of what really needs to happen. Sometimes just other portions of the drawing need to be developed before I can really make a clear statement about another part, if that makes sense. And if I'm saying anything that just makes no sense, and you're curious, or you have a completely different, even opposite perspective, I love to hear it. That's why we're doing this drawing together, is that I like to hear differing opinions. That's what drawing's all about. Remember, marks are thoughts. So my set of thoughts are going to be different than yours. And that all impacts their drawing. So all right, I need to move over here because there's some stuff I need to work on. Here, I kind of forgot to rotate my pencil, and it's starting to really flatten out. I'm creating this wedge here that I should be rotating my pencil as I move to keep it relatively round. And I'm just using the weight of the pencil as I do this. I'm really not putting much pressure at all. And as I come across here, this is going to be really tricky, this edge of light catching on the peel there. And then you get this highlight in here. And I can tell my brain is already wanting to calibrate to the value structure on the drawing and tell me that this is white when it's not. So I have to remind myself I'm going to go lighter than this. Sue is saying, I think the left edge of the peel needs to be in closer. In other words, the width of the peel shell is too wide. Let me check that. It feels like it's that if I use the width of the fruit as my basic unit, it seems to align with the proportions when I use my comparative measuring against the the reference photo. So let me chew on that though. Thank you for bringing that up. I want to kind of sit with this a little bit because that's an instance of what I was just talking about. You know, if it's off, I don't quite know what to do to fix it. So I'm just want to let that kind of work in the background of my mind and kind of keep moving throughout the drawing. And then I'll make that decision when I have a little bit more information. All right, let me see. Yeah, this is all really tricky here. And so I'm kind of alternating between squinting and bringing my eyes into focus. And one of the things that if you're new, you wouldn't have heard me say this yet, but for those of you who have been with me for a while, will you kind of know that, you know, what I'm doing is when I'm looking at the reference image, that's when I'm kind of making my decision. I'm kind of preparing the marks, preparing the thoughts in my brain, doing a really quick kind of practice in my mind of what marks I should be making. And when I'm looking at the paper, my primary goal is to first check where I am, right? As I want to make sure I'm in the right spot when I execute on the observations that I just kind of had locked into my mind. So I'm trying to, now that this is all in shadow, I'm going to try to differentiate that a little bit. And then, so I haven't forgotten your observation about this distance here. So I want to keep that working in my mind. So I'm looking at really these value relationships in here and what disappears when I squint. Because when you focus on something, when you really stare at something, that contrast increases and I can see something more clearly. And sometimes then when you blur your vision, it disappears. I think ultimately, if you're not sure what to do, whether you should make it more clear or less clear, I like to default to the observations when I'm of the blurred vision. Wintermelon says hi, hello, welcome. If anybody's new, I'd love to hear where you're watching from. And so as I'm working along here, you can see the edge of the peel. I kind of have a rough line established. I'm going to darken that background a little bit. And then this part here is in shadow, and I'm kind of working from the outer side, working into find that edge. So rather than drawing that line, I'm kind of building the values and just keep extending it until I find the right thickness of that peel. And there's a lot of texture happening in there, so I'm just going to suggest it. And I think one of the things that is really going to be helpful in this is to be selective with my focus in the detail, allow some areas of the drawing to be soft and atmospheric, while other areas are sharper and greater detail. That's going to make the drawing more visually interesting, and I think it's also going to convey the form more effectively. Ah, Winter saying you're drawing a portrait. Well, welcome. I hope that portrait is going well. Those are wicked hard. I know we've done a few portraits in this whole series and with mixed success. So they're challenging for me. All right, here's what I'm going to do. I need to shift my gears. I'm kind of getting lost a little bit. So I'm going to bring out my shading stump and my blending stump here. And remember that the blending stump isn't just a tool to smooth out your marks. It's an opportunity to contribute to the form. And you always want to be observing and recording those observations. So right now I want to be thinking about the structure of the interior part of the peel. It creates a bit of a cove there. So I'm looking for the marks that will help me to suggest that. And I'm choosing to switch to this using this tool because then as I make these lines, they're more likely to be read as shadows. They're going to set back a little bit more. If I had used the charcoal to do that, it's going to be a stronger mark that might project forward. And in this way, I can kind of sneak up on some of these marks. And if I need to intensify them, I can bring the charcoal in on top. But I want to start from a point where I'm not necessarily overstating some of these marks in here. Otherwise, it'll flatten out the drawing. And so in this case, there's kind of two dimensions. If we look at the cross contour information, there are marks that kind of I can draw that can kind of move around this way, and there's also marks that can move this way. And I'm trying to change my marks up, but the subtle changes in direction of my marks can make a big impact on how we interpret that space. I'm glad the drawing is going well, the winter. Afsaf, watching from Pakistan, nice. Welcome. That's awesome. You know, we've had people from all over the world here, so that's really cool. So right in here, we have an issue where that peel cuts in behind, and then we have the outer side come in on top, and then we have this highlight that comes in. I want to build that up kind of in layers. So rather than working too much to sharpen this edge now, I'm going to bring these light shadows that are on the inside of the peel, I'm just going to bring it right over to the edge. And then I'm going to use my eraser to kind of clean that up. I'm going to draw that hole that's in the peel there. And the same with right along here. I'm going to kind of basically work from both sides to find that edge. And I'm not worried about creating a clean edge here. I'm going to go right up to it. And then I can use my eraser to clean that up. And when I'm running my marks here along the surface, I'm trying to hold in my mind the idea that this is already a three-dimensional object that's on the surface. And what direction would my blending stump move if I were to really be wrapping around that form? One of the things I'm also trying to be mindful of as I'm using this is continually rolling it in my fingers so that I have kind of a newly active part of the blending stump to work with. You know, sometimes if I don't do that, I'll kind of run out of material on this. And as I'm thinking about texture, I want the materials to kind of do some work for me. And so I'm allowing the material to just kind of roll and kind of skip across the surface rather than really get too precise. You know, I'm not using like the fine point of the pencil to do that. All right, so I can finally feel my brain starting to settle out now. It was so scattered to begin with. It's just been an interesting day. Kind of doing some negative drawing in here, looking at the kind of the darker shapes, and I'm trying to not think too much about the idea that this is an orange. Just try to think about it abstractly at this stage. Just think, you know, what shapes and values am I looking at? Because when I really start to identify this as an orange too much, then I start to draw from this kind of preconceived notion of what it should look like rather than what it does look like. If that makes sense. That's so much of what happens. Again, you know, marks are thoughts, and what I've seen many beginning students do is they'll take a quick glance at the reference image, and then they'll come to the drawing, and then they'll work for an hour on the drawing without ever looking at the image again. So they're not developing that mental understanding, that mental image of the reference. They're instead just getting deeper and deeper into their own imagination. And that's really where the power of working from life can be so powerful. If you're an artist who's trying to develop your imagination and work from imagination, working from life actually really helps that, right? Because you're building that mental library of how things look, so that when you do draw from imagination, you have more specific information to go from. And so what happens when you draw from life, or if you have a reference photo, you just have something that you can compare that to, and you say, does my mental image of this orange align with the photo of it? And if not, then you can make specific decisions. When you're working from your imagination, you don't really have something to compare that to. You can only ask yourself, does this align with that mental image? Hopefully that makes sense. I'm thinking along in here. This is all very subtle, but I'm going to allow the blending stump to kind of skip across the surface, and I'm trying to see the alternating sequence of light and dark and these individual shapes, and how as we move up to the edge of the orange, like right along in here, which has kind of been obscured, as we move up to this edge, those marks get thinner and thinner as they wrap around. So I want my marks to kind of reflect that change in shape along the contour versus the interior. As they wrap around here, they become more open, more broad. And look how that edge is really just kind of disappearing. I'm going to increase that contrast a little bit later. But I want to be selective about that, because there may be areas where I want that edge to get lost. And now there's this side of the orange. We have the outer spherical form of it, and then that flat plane on the inside of that wedge of the orange. And those marks change direction, and I can use these subtle changes to help reinforce that. All right, I think what I need to do is darken this background just a little bit. So I'm just using the palm of my hand to smooth this out here because it's less oily than my fingertips. Let's see. Yeah, that's becoming a hot mess right up here, isn't it? Ugly duckling stage coming through. So again, if you're new, one of the things we talk about in this series too is the idea that drawings will often go through what I refer to as the ugly duckling stage, where you just feel like the whole thing is just going to fall apart, that it's just not coming together. And that's when I get really excited. That's when the fight for the drawing comes through, right? And you really start to struggle, and your own voice starts to take over. Sometimes with a drawing that comes together too cleanly, too smooth, it doesn't open up to any sort of happy accidents. But I do like to try to approach drawing every object, with a part of my mind that kind of toys with the idea that, what if this was the first drawing I'd ever done? There's a sense of discovery that takes place when you're new to drawing, and I think if you can maintain that discovery and that experimentation throughout your drawing practice, it can be really exciting. And that's what ultimately leads to that ugly duckling stage, and so that's why I always get excited by that. All right, so here's what I'm going to do is I want to define that edge a little bit more, and kind of draw a bit of a line along in here, but I want to feather that out so that it doesn't It doesn't stand out too much. How's that look? Okay. I'm going to let that edge get lost. Bring that edge in, and then I'm going to bring the light in on top here. That's going to bring that edge out. So then we'll have this alternation between dark and light down in there. And so the way you treat edges can really have a big impact on how the drawing is interpreted. So edges are really critical. Jan J, okay, the top edge of your peeling is going back instead of forward. So right in along here. Yeah, that may, if you're using the toned paper, that may change when we get to the point where we're adding the white on top. And then right along in here, there's a really kind of an interesting transition from the dark of the outer peel to then this light catching in here and then a sharpness. Okay, let's see, I'm going to bring this back out. This blending stump. All right, I'm going to define this a little bit more. All right, there's this dark shape back in here. And then we come in into here. This is all in shadow, but then there's areas in here where there's like this peel here. And there's this dark strip in here. So there's contrast and values within that shadow. That's what I'm observing right now. And as I come in under here, this is right in here in this shadow area. It's a little bit tricky. That those value relationships are all very subtle, but in general, I think this area is a little bit darker than that. And what I'll do is I'm going to sharpen up this edge. So since I've been using the side of the pencil throughout most of the drawing, this point is still relatively sharp. I can just roll my hand up a little bit to give me a sharp edge. So Mugly May is saying, so the doubt and anxiety that I'm not drawing what it looks like is normal. It is. It is very normal. Drawing is a struggle. You know, for me, I always come back to, again, the idea that marks are thoughts. So if the marks aren't working, I try to go back to what is my thinking about the object. And if I kind of know right out the gate that my initial interpretation of the subject is going to be insubstantial, you know, it's not going to be enough, then my goal throughout the drawing is to gradually become more and more familiar with the subject. So as I become familiar with the subject, my drawing is going to improve. And throughout the drawing practice, my understanding of the subject improves. So they feed one another in this really interesting loop. And so you become more familiar with the subject. The more familiar you become, the better your drawing will be. The more accurate your drawing will be. It's more precise. So. You know, our brains kind of work against us when we're trying to draw from life, because our whole visual system is designed to not get bogged down by information. You know, so imagine we were a complete blank slate as a mind, open our eyes and look at this. It takes a lot of mental energy to interpret all of that visual information and everything that comes along with it. So what happens is our brain does a lot of work in the background. Our subconscious looks at this does a lot of that processing of the specific information, and then just sends to our conscious mind only what it really needs to know. And in general, what our conscious mind needs to know is that this is an orange and we can eat it, and I like it or I don't like it. It doesn't send all of that raw data that our subconscious has processed to our conscious mind. That's just too much information. So throughout the drawing process, we're gradually leaking all of that raw information to our conscious mind so that we have a better understanding of really what is particular about this piece of fruit versus any other. So it forces us to kind of slow down and be one with our thoughts for a little while. But it's not a natural thing. You know, we're kind of fighting that part of our brain that just says, hey, that's a lot of information, and I need to know mostly what is useful about this. And for the most part, what's useful about this is that it's an orange and that we can eat it, and how it tastes, your previous experiences with it. You can say, I had one that was too sweet, too bitter, one that was rotten one time, that was awful, that kind of thing. But not that raw data that says this is exactly what I'm looking at. Ellen Brandon is saying, will this be available as a recorded video? Yes, it will. It all goes up, so it's all on our YouTube channel. You'll find all previous episodes, or you can go to artistnetwork.com and view them there. They're all loaded into the subscription if you'd like to view them. This is episode 61, I believe. So there's a lot that we can go through. They're not sequential, so if you would, if there's a particular subject you're looking to draw, you could easily just jump to that. All right. I want this all to fall into shadow here. So here you can do some negative drawing to try to bring this jagged edge of the peel forward a little bit. Now I feel like this is off by a little bit, the proportions in this jagged edge, but that's going to be okay. Just going to tell myself that I have a certain tolerance for accuracy that may not be the same tolerance that you have. You may want it to be more accurate or not. And this is going to be important to get this shadow in under here. And the reason we started this series is, with, being kind of locked in the apartment a bit when I was starting. This I thought was a good opportunity to develop my skills of drawing because I had neglected it for so long. As an oil painter, I spent more time painting, and I just wanted to use this time to develop my drawing skills. And so what I'm trying to do is find challenges that are going to help me in other areas of my artwork. And that's what we do as artists, right? We're constantly growing, and I think giving yourself a particular challenge is really helpful. And sometimes those challenges are successful, sometimes they're not. I guess, well, actually, all challenges are successful. You're going to learn something from them, no matter what you do. But the drawing itself may be more of a challenge some days than others, but they're all going to be valuable to you as an artist. So I hope you're being kind to yourself and recognizing that even when a drawing doesn't come together, as giving you more information is something that you can grow from there. Don't like what's happening down in here. This is all very subtle. All right, so now what I want to do is, I think I need to bring in some of those lights now. So I'm going to erase out areas where I think I'm going to be putting some of the white, because I don't want that charcoal laid down. Sometimes you can mix the charcoal and the white pastel pencil on top, Sometimes it just gets muddy. Sometimes that mud is great. Sometimes it's not. So I'm just going through and trying to define where am I going to put some of that white and kind of go from there. So as I'm doing this, so as I've got the eraser, I'm still thinking about trying to contribute to the form. This becomes a tool for me to make marks that suggest the form of the subject. So right along in here, erase that out. It's all very, very fuzzy in here, but I think as we lay down that white, I think it's going to sharpen up that edge. And again, I want to be selective with my focus and add sharpness to some of these edges, very in select areas, not around the whole thing. So right down in here. Raina saying, I love the challenge, that's why I paint now. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of us as artists, that's what we do, is we embrace the challenge of things. I mean, the last thing I want to do is have 100% successful painting, right? There's always going to be something that it's going to pull me in to do the next one. Something to improve on, whether that's the accuracy in the rendering or whether it's the storytelling, so capturing more emotion, things like that. Right now, I just need to kind of clear my head a little bit, so I'm going to work on this background. Drop in some value there. All right, let's bring in the white. All right, so utilizing the side of the pencil is going to be really critical here because I just want to suggest these forms here. If I get in there and I start outlining everything, it's going to give me trouble, I think. It's just everything's going to pop off the surface. And so I'm going to ease into it. I'm just going to be using the weight of the white pencil. And then as I need to, I can add more. So I think it's really helpful at this stage to actually be kind of more soft in my focus as I study the reference image. And again, double checking. I don't want to take these proportions for granted. If I see something that is incorrect, I want to adjust it. So it's very, very light, and then when I need to, I can lean in on the white a little bit more to bring out more control, more contrast there. Oh, there's this really kind of interesting kind of sharp point right there. And so as I'm thinking about it, I'm trying to think about this kind of two paths along the cross contour. So these are marks kind of within the form. I can move this way to create the three-dimensional form, and I can also move this way. So think latitude and longitude lines. And I don't want these marks to be straight like latitude and longitude, but I'm kind of thinking about those two directions as I go. And that will help to reinforce the volume of the object. If I just keep all of my marks diagonal, for example, I'm losing an opportunity to really reinforce the structure of the object. Right down here, there's a bunch of charcoal, and I'm kind of letting it blend with the white. It's changing the tone just a little bit. And you can kind of get a sense that the light is strongest right in this area. I started to make those marks that I was just warning about, those diagonal marks. And I'm trying not to be I don't want to match the photo one-to-one. I'm just trying to get a sense for the texture, what type of direction those marks are moving. and then let my pencil kind of follow those observations and kind of create a general kind of interpretation of those marks rather than a very specific and literal. I kind of like that lost edge right there. And Winter's saying, I want to draw with charcoal and that, but I already spent so much money on art supplies that I don't use like watercolors, some paper, acrylics, and oils. So I totally get that. Art supplies sure can be kind of expensive, but hopefully, this is inspiring you to draw. To me, I think it has improved my painting. I've been able to get more accurate proportions and perspective, better value control in my painting as a result. So if you have those materials that you're not using, perhaps it is drawing itself that would actually kind of take you into that next step where you're inspired to paint and use those materials. So just something to throw out there. All right, there's this wedge right here has got some interesting light. I need to continue to roll this pencil as I make my marks too, so that I'm not kind of creating flat spots on there. As I look down here, I'm thinking about that edge of the peel. So I'm dropping just these vertical lines in here where that edge would be. All right, moving across here, this edge here is the one I'm really excited about. That light is really catching it. So using the side of it, of the material, changing the direction of my marks. I don't want to be drawing lines. I want to be thinking in terms of shape here. So right down on this edge, though, it gets a little bit sharper of an edge. That's really cool. Edge variation is so critical in terms of creating a sense of realism. So what I mean by that is if you follow along the edge of any object, there should be a change either in contrast, line weight, value, etc. As often as possible. The less variation you have, the flatter it's going to be. And that may be something that you want depending on the concept of your work. But if you're going for realism, varying your edge is really helpful for that. Actually, right in here, I want to really lean in on this one a little bit more. How's that work? All right, that's better. Ellen is asking how I sharpen my pencils. I do use a razor blade to do that rather than a pencil sharpener. But you have to be very careful with the pastel pencil. It's softer, it'll break more easily, so that tends to take a little bit longer. You may find that it's just better to use a pencil sharpener with the pastel, or even if you have white charcoal. And there's this cool little light here. I did not see that earlier. There's a little bit of light catching right in there. It goes back into shadow. Light catches up here a little bit more. And then kind of catching in the bowl of the orange, there's some light up here that I can create. So I'm doing these circular marks to help kind of blend the white and then the white pastel and the charcoal. And then there's light that hits this edge right in here more. How's that work? I think that works out all right. All right, coming across here. So I have my arm resting on the lip of this. That's keeping this hand off the paper. If you don't have that, you can use what's called a maul stick, which is, if we take out a paintbrush here, it's essentially a stick that rests on the paper. You rest your hand on it. I don't generally worry too much about protecting it. If I smudge this, I know I can always reclaim it. But if you're wondering how to keep it clean, that might be something to consider. So as I come across here, just kind of lightly sketch this. I don't want to have too much detail there. I want to bring this edge forward. Hunter is saying, how often do I draw? Right now I draw twice a week. So I draw during this live event plus a preparatory sketch. When we started the series, I was doing it 3 days a week, so that allowed me to work on 3 live sessions plus 3 drawings to prepare. But I have to admit that one of the things that compelled this series was the fact that I had neglected my drawing practice, where I was hardly drawing at all. I was painting so much. And so, ideally, if I had, unlimited time and not limited other work obligations, I would be drawing every day at least a little bit, sketching something, sketching an idea for a painting, or going out working on plein air and keeping your skills sharp. But you do what you can. And I think it's most valuable to establish a daily habit for art making, but it's very difficult for most people to be able to do that. So don't beat yourself up if you can. You just do what you can. Right in here, I'm kind of allowing the two materials to mix together because it's creating some interesting contrast in the shadows. And working with the side of the pencil kind of encourages the white to float on top of the black a little bit more. Sometimes if I switch to this tripod grip and I'm really engaging the point, it'll scrape away the charcoal rather than floating on top, and it kind of gives some trouble there. I have not changed the pencil, so I've only used the HB and then my white pencil here. And I'm going to come back in with the 6B charcoal in just a little bit to really pull out the darks in certain areas. All right, so I just need to evaluate. I'm trying to really kind of study the shape of the light and the dark in here in that bowl, because it gets light in here. And I can't remember who posted earlier, but saying that it felt like the peel was inverted. This is the step where it might really flip that. So by adding that white and having it in contrast to the dark, it increases the contrast, which is likely to pop that forward. And so this hopefully is helping you with that. So really just using very light pressure here, just the weight of the material. All right, and here, I love this thin sliver of that light there. And then right along in here, it kind of catches. And one of the things I've learned is to be kind of gentle with this material. It's really easy just to snap off. And so to kind of ease into it, and you'll get a feel for what it can take and what, when it's going to break the point there. And that's why working on the side is a little bit more effective. When you're working on the side of the pencil, there's always an edge that is sharp. And if you keep rolling your material, there's always going to be a sharp edge. And that can be really helpful in creating the lines that you need. You don't always have to rely on the point of the pencil to give yourself those fine details that are so kind of seductive in drawing. All right, so let's see, we're almost an hour and a half in. I think we're getting pretty close to done. There's some areas in here that I could develop even farther, but one of the things, again, we've talked about in this series is that if you following this process, my hope is that it puts you in the driver's seat in terms of how much detail you want to have, how much more rendering you might want to do. So if you build everything up at once, you may have decided you want to stop an hour ago, or you want to keep going for 2-3 hours and you just keep adding detail. But if you build the whole drawing up at once, it gives you that opportunity to really drive that in your drawing. If you start by rendering completely one area and then moving to another area and finishing that, in that process, you're kind of locked in. You kind of have to finish it. You have to bring everything up to that degree now. But this allows me to really kind of be more selective in what is finished and what's not. Because I kind of like leaving this area unfinished because that encourages me in the viewer's eye to go to the areas that are more finished. A kind of selective focus. So now I can come back in with my 6B, and I'm going to darken in some of these shadows here where I don't have really a strong value relationship. Somebody's asking, how do I store my drawings? Right now, they're just underneath this easel, just laid on top of one another. I'm not being very precious with them because I view these as studies. If I wanted to preserve them, I would probably get like a mylar paper, parchment paper to slide in between them. And if you have a vertical storage system, that would probably be even better. I don't like to spray fix them just because it can distort them. If I were to frame them, perhaps I would do a light spray fix. How does that work? Let's see, I like that edge. So I just want to be selective of where I really bring in my darkest darks now. So right in here, I feel like I can add a little bit more contrast. This is maybe where I kind of adjust and kind of deviate from the reference photo a little bit if I see something. I'm kind of just thinking about where the eye goes and how to balance things off. Where is it flat? Where does it need more contrast? So right in here, I feel like this is pretty flat. So if I can add a little bit more variation and artificially kind of darken this, I don't see it being darker right in here in the reference. So I'm kind of inventing this. But my hope is to kind of break up that space a little bit more. And then I can do the same over here. Darken that a little bit. Again, deviating from the photograph. But this is a drawing, not a photograph now, so. Actually, what I want to do is maybe bring in a line along in here. See how that works. It feels a bit more balanced to me. And again, there's some areas here where I've let that be unfinished. But maybe perhaps that's a little too unfinished. What can I do? I think maybe I do want a little bit of line to kind of clean that up. And I think I want to do that right in here. And let me see if I can articulate why. I don't know if there really is a reason. But I'm going to use a line to define this edge rather than that value relationship, and just want to see how that feels. Something that Sargent would do is, you'd be really selective about line work. In some cases, you'd be really bold with it. In other cases, it would be much more subtle. Yeah, I think I'm happy with that. Sajida, you have a question about what I'm drawing on. This is just a gray tone drawing paper. There's a list in the description below if you're curious about the materials. This does go up as a recording, so you also go back. If you go back and watch the intro, I'll show the paper actually. It's a Strathmore gray toned paper. So it's fairly smooth. Now I'm just making very subtle adjustments. This feels too flat in here. So I'm kind of taking these angled marks. I'm out of material on my blending stump, so I'm going to smooth this out. And my goal right here is just to load this blending stump up. And if I come in under here, I can add a little bit more information. I'm trying to think about that plane, how it wraps around this way. This slice, this wedge of the orange has some more information right along in there. All right. That feels a bit better. I kind of increased the contrast there, but I like the way that those wedges stand out now. Sometimes you can make a really thin line, so you barely see it, but it's enough that the eye perceives it and it sharpens up that edge. If the line gets too strong, it can sometimes flatten things out, so just want to be careful of those. But I think we're pretty much close to done here. If you have any additional questions, just let me know. I'll hang on for a little bit, but this is pretty much it. So we do meet every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. For more information, you can go to artistnetwork.com. You'll find the link below. You'll find a link to the show page for this where you can go and share your work. I've been seeing some really amazing drawings that you all have been posting, so thank you for doing that. I love seeing that community of artists that's forming out of all of this. So go on there, share your work, tell us a bit about the experience with the drawing. But yeah. Well, you're welcome, everybody. All right. Again, there's about a 30-second delay here, so I'm just going to hang on for just a bit, see if I can catch any lingering questions. But it's been a pleasure drawing with you all. I do feel like overall my brain is a little bit more focused than it was when I started. I was so scattered, but that's what happens, and hopefully you're being kind to yourself. If you have a day where you're just like, my brain is somewhere else, that's, use the drawing process to help bring focus into that. But don't put too much pressure on yourself to really create a great drawing. Sometimes I would just make bad drawings just because I needed to get my body moving and make marks. And not every drawing has to be something that's finished and polished and something that you would want to share. It's a lot of drawing that I do that nobody's ever seen. And that's okay. Heather is saying that the HB is, I believe, harder than a 2B. So you have your H scale, which are harder, and then your B scale, which are softer. So it would go HB, then 2B, 4B, 6B, etc. Mad moments go. Can I peel this off the paper Kneaded? That would be awesome. So thank you all. Greg, say Scott, has all of this drawing inspired you at all to do a plein air landscape drawing as opposed to oil that you usually do? I have done drawing quite a bit, plein air. It's good to hear from you, Greg. But in a lot of my paintings, there'll be an initial stage that is a bit like drawing, and I'll do a sketch often in a sketchbook to kind of work through the composition, because sometimes an initial impulse, I'll have it kind of in my mind, all right, this is how the composition should be. And then I do the painting and I'm like, that doesn't look good at all. It's what I thought it was, like, it's exactly the composition I had anticipated, but not being able to see it, I wasn't aware of certain issues with the composition. It just always worked out better in my mind. And so then I started to force myself to do an initial sketch before I do the drawing. Before I do the painting. So that's really the amount of drawing that I do when I work in plein air. So, but what's challenging is often when working outdoors is that, interpreting those values on a, just creating a plein air drawing is generally underwhelming. Having that color from the oil painting is just so kind of seductive. So hopefully that makes sense. All right, you're welcome, everybody. Thank you so much. Looks like we have all the questions in here. I will see you all on Wednesday. We're going to be drawing shiny metal. So I took a photo of a doorknob to kind of manage those reflections. Is not something that I think we've addressed in this series so far. So that's where we're going next week. Join me then. I can't wait to see you all again. In the meantime, have a great weekend. Keep on drawing. See you then.